A look at El Salvador.
First, we are going to talk about a brief history of El Salvador. In 1838, El Salvador gained independence from Spain and then Central American Union. Following its independence, there were a series of revolutions and war against other Central American countries. From 1931 to 1979, there were multiple military dictatorships. Many revolts and protests tried to overthrow it, which ended in more death and violence. In 1969, El Salvador went to war against Honduras for 4 days. Unhappy with the country's poor economy, social inequities, and repressive dictatorship, a civil war broke out in 1980 and lasted for 12 years. The U.S. sided with the military dictatorship despite its countless violations against human rights. In 1998, El Salvador got hit with a devastating Hurricane Mitch. 2001 brought earthquakes and a drought. The natural disasters destroyed infrastructure, killed people, left people homeless, and caused famine. In 2004, the elected president made a free trade agreement with the U.S., making El Salvador the first Central American country to do so, which helped their economy grow. In 2012, the gang truce led to a 40% drop in crime. The constant violence and natural disasters took a toll on people's health. There were major inequities in healthcare access and quality. The low access and high out-of-pocket expenses had negative health impacts on low-income and rural communities, including increasing morbidity, mortality, and disability from communicable disease and chronic non-communicable disease. With political stability and some foreign aid, El Salvador launched the National Health Strategy in 2009, which reformed the healthcare system and aimed to reduce inequalities in access, improve quality, and strengthen the management of public health. There were many improvements in health after renovation. Births in health facilities increased, and neonatal units were implemented, which led to a decrease in neonatal and maternity mortality rates. Treatment centers for cancer were created, the emergency response network was strengthened, and overall improvement in healthcare facilities and equipment was updated. The government developed the National Reference Institute to tackle infectious diseases. The healthcare system was both a public and private system, so more people gained access to general care under the public sector. Today, the total expenditure of GDP on health is 6.8%.
Demographics, culture, and indigenous peoples. El Salvador is the smallest, most densely populated country in Central America. The country ranks in the 83rd percentile in population density worldwide. As of 2017, El Salvador's population is approximately 6.4 million people. The country is experiencing a decline in population growth, mostly due to an increase in family planning. It should be noted that the most common method of contraception is female sterilization. El Salvador has one of the highest female sterilization rates in Latin America and the Caribbean. Ethnic groups in El Salvador are Mestizo, which makes up 86.3%, white 12.7%, Amerindian 0.2%, black 0.2%, and other 0.6%. Here's the population pyramid for El Salvador. This is from 2018. Indigenous peoples. 10% of Salvadoran peoples are indigenous. The majority of this population is Nahua Pipil. Other populations include Lenca, Cacoapra, and Maya Chorti. According to a 2004 World Bank Social Assessment study, they determined that indigenous groups make up the poorest segments of the Salvadoran population. Most of indigenous housing is very rudimentary. For example, 80% of roofs are made of zinc, plastic, or cardboard. Additionally, the average number of people per household is 13 people for indigenous households versus 6 people for poor, non-indigenous Salvadoran households. The illiteracy rate for indigenous children is 78%, compared to the 43% for non-indigenous poor children. Also, only 5% of indigenous people own land versus 95% of non-indigenous people in El Salvador. Culture. Salvadorans are primarily Christian. Of these, 50% are Roman Catholic, 36% are Protestant, and 2% follow a religion other than the previous two. 12% of Salvadorans do not follow any religion. Soccer is a big component of Salvadoran culture. The country is home to the largest soccer stadium in Central America. Mestizo culture, a result of the combination of the indigenous populations and the Spanish settlers, dominates the country still today. Machismo, where traditional gender roles place the man as the breadwinner and the woman as the homemaker, is still prevalent throughout El Salvador today as well.
So we're going to start off with the education, economics, and industry of El Salvador. First, the educational system. El Salvador has a Ministry of Health and Social Welfare, also known as MSPAS. This is a section of government that determines the national health policy and healthcare education of their country. The MSPS pretty much aims to educate and to provide new initiatives to improve the health and quality of their citizens. They're also responsible for providing basic healthcare education on disease prevention measures. Some other educational facts is that in 2016, the adult literacy rate was 88.14. And from 2009 to 2014, enrollment declined in primary schools at nearly 12.6%. As we can see on our second slide, the primary school is pretty much from the age of 7 to 18. So it's pretty much like going through elementary school, middle school, and high school. And recently we can see that this decline could be due to families and even children not believing that health or going to school is worth it when they could be at home helping their family. Homeschooling is illegal by the government of El Salvador, and another shocking fact is approximately 7% of people attend secondary education, which, if we can look on the second slide, secondary education is pretty much going to a community college or going to like a technical high school and getting a 2-year degree. And we can also see that approximately 1.7% of people attend tertiary education, which is your undergraduate, your graduate, which is your master's, and your doctorate degrees. If El Salvador wants to improve their quality of life, improve healthcare, improve infrastructure, they need to push people to go and into their education system and go on to college or even push secondary education. Next, we'll look at the economy and industry of El Salvador. The economy of El Salvador in 2017, GDP growth in El Salvador reached 2.3%, and its per capita GDP was approximately $4,000 US. Some good news is from 2007 to 2016, extreme poverty, which is living off of $3.20 a day, decreased from 15% to 10%. And more good news is from the same timeline, poverty rate, which is they have the line about $5.50 per day, decreased from 39% to 31%. This is just showing that the country is taking an active stand against poverty, and with that comes a lot of health benefits because people usually living in poverty are not educated, or they're living in pretty poor conditions. So among poverty rates is high mortality rates as well. We're also going to look at the industry and infrastructure of El Salvador. 2/3 of their observed growth in industry is created from their agriculture, livestock, forestry, fisheries, manufacturing, mining, and then some of it's from commerce. So we can see that they're mainly a agrarian type of country. They get a lot of their overall growth from living off the land and using their natural resources. But some also really good benefits is in 2016, they improved their water sources by 10%, from 79 to 89%. And in the same year, they improved their sanitation, which from 56% over to 95%. So that shows that the country of El Salvador is taking a active role in bettering their community, and it also, starting with water and sanitation is one of the biggest indications of health within their country.
Health status. The healthcare system of El Salvador is run by a Ministry of Health and contains both public and private spending and insurance coverage. El Salvador has a low birth rate at 2 children per woman and a moderately high infant mortality rate. For children under 5, it's 20 children per 1,000 births, under 1 is 17 children per 1,000 births, and neonates is 11 per 1,000 births. The mortality rate is also mid-range at 7.3 individuals per 100,000. Leading causes of death for men are homicide, ischemic heart disease, and diabetes, ischemic heart disease, and cerebrovascular disease for women. Morbidity among diseases is variable, with increased incidences of dengue and Zika. However, many people die of homicide, of which rates are increasing due to gang violence. Vaccination compliance is pretty high for children under 5. Other challenges of the healthcare system include overproduction of healthcare workers, with oversaturation in cities and undersaturation in rural areas, and resources are also limited and communication between institutions is poor.
In this section, I'll discuss the progress El Salvador has made in achieving the goals outlined in the MDGs and SDGs. In 2000, El Salvador and the rest of the UN member countries agreed to achieve a set of goals by 2015. These goals were known as the Millennium Development Goals, whose aim were to combat poverty, hunger, disease, illiteracy, environmental degradation, and discrimination against women. To accomplish the goals outlined in the MDGs, El Salvador established multiple targets. Of these targets, El Salvador was successful in reducing extreme poverty, achieving universal primary education, increasing gender equality, combating malaria and other diseases, and increasing access to water and sanitation. The progress seen in achieving universal primary education can be partially attributed to a country-specific costing tool that allowed El Salvador to identify its lowest performing schools and to also find financial and human resources that could be put towards achieving universal primary education. El Salvador was almost successful in meeting its targets for reducing child mortality, providing universal access to reproductive health, reducing maternal mortality, and providing universal access to treatments for HIV/AIDS. While El Salvador did not achieve these targets, it did make great strides in addressing these areas. Of note was El Salvador's use of policies to increase access to healthcare facilities, particularly by the poor, that contributed to a reduction in under 5 mortality. While El Salvador was overall successful in its attempts to meet the MDGs, it fell behind in several targets. These targets being reducing hunger, increasing primary schooling, and halting and reversing the spread of HIV/AIDS. Building off of the success of the MDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals present an even more ambitious set of goals to be accomplished by 2030. The SDGs are comprised of 17 goals that aim to address the issues that are associated with poverty, inequality, climate, environmental degradation, prosperity, and peace and justice. In order to start making progress in achieving the goals outlined in the SDGs, El Salvador has placed the 2030 Agenda for SDGs at the heart of its public policy and integrated it into its 5-year development plan. While El Salvador is working to accomplish all the goals outlined in the SDGs, it has prioritized 9. Of the 9 goals, no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, and clean water and sanitation are especially important to public health. Additional ways in which El Salvador is making progress is raising awareness for the SDGs by hosting workshops that aim to inform public servants on the SDGs and to create a space for communication. Furthermore, El Salvador is looking into creating a national council for SDGs to foster synergies among developmental stakeholders at the national and subnational levels for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and is generating indicators for analyzing the progress being made towards achieving the SDGs.